Thanks for coming. Thanks for having me. I'm JD Flynn. I'm a technical architect. You can find me on Twitter at JDDoesDev on all the Slacks. I'm Dwarf. If you want to tweet about this, hashtag DCATL, and please tag at OSMEHelp if you do. Do any of you know what OSME is, or have you heard of us? Okay, I'm pretty sure. May have heard it in passing, or at least seen the booth out there. So I like to start off with a big friendly greeting, so hello. I also have a couple of disclaimers, because I like to cover my ass. One, I am not a mental health professional or a medical professional. I'm also not a legal professional. I tend to swear without thinking about it, so I'm sorry ahead of time. I try to keep it PG-13, which allows for 1 F-bomb and tasteful nudity. I'm going to forego the latter and maybe do 2 F-bombs if that's okay with everybody. Also, I'm going to go into quite a bit of detail. So, big question, why are we here? And I'm not trying to spark some existential philosophical debate. I mean, why are we here right now? Personally, I'm here to talk with you about something that's very, very important to me and something that I hope is important to you. And I hope that you're here because you want to take part in a conversation. I'm also here to tell my story because I'm hoping that it helps somebody in the way that another person's story helped me. So, let's have a conversation. You're all going to learn a lot about me, and I mean a lot, so I like to have an idea of who I'm talking with. How many of you are developers, designers, anything directly related to making sites or programming? The majority. Are any of you project managers, project owners, account managers, similar? Okay, a couple of you. Is anybody in HR? No, okay. Are any of you in upper management? Managers, presidents, C-level? I know you are. Okay. All right, so a little bit about me. I've been doing Drupal and PHP for about 6 years now. I've been doing HTML since the 90s when internet first came to my town. Before that, I kind of learned a little bit of BASIC. Is anybody familiar with a magazine called 321 Contact or a show on PBS? Yeah, the magazine, in the back of it, used to have a basic program written out where there's no copy and paste from that. You had to type out every character from that and hope that you get it right. And it was a good intro to debugging. A lot of frustrating afternoons. I also help organize MidCamp, which is the Chicago area Drupal camp. Help organize the Drupal Chicago meetup. And before all this, in a past life, I was a paramedic, EMT, and a volunteer firefighter for about 10 years. So a little bit of a career change there. I also have mental illnesses. Now, why do I care about this? Well, for a very long time, I suffered in silence. I was in denial. I was afraid that admitting I had an illness would make it real. It's kind of a situation where you're in perfect health until a doctor tells you otherwise. If you don't have a diagnosis, there's nothing wrong. I was worried that if I told people, they'd treat me differently. If I mentioned how I was feeling, hey, I'm having a bad day because I can't get out of bed, I can't function, they would look, oh man, no, can't be around you. Now, something that I have to remind myself, tell myself, and convince myself is that I'm not weak, I'm sick. I'm not damaged, I have a disease, it's not a choice, it's a condition. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about mental illness, so I figure I might as well design it or define it a little bit. If I didn't, this would be a very short presentation. Mental illness refers to a wide range of mental health conditions or disorders that affect your mood, thinking, and behavior. There's a book called the DSM-5, which is the latest version, published in 2013. It's about this tall, and it lists approximately 150 different diagnoses. If you count all the variations like severe manic depressive or severe bipolar, depressive episode versus major depression, it goes up to about 300. The first one was in 1952. Now that seems like a long time ago, but in all of history, that's not really that long ago that we've been considering mental illness as an illness and not just something. I'm going to talk a lot about the stigma too. Stigma around mental illness. There is a stigma around people with mental illness. For centuries, people with mental illness were treated as less than, grouped in the same population as criminals. You hear the term the criminally insane. It's a trope in movies where, they're living in the asylum because they don't know how to treat them. There's also the stereotypes that people with mental illness are dangerous. People weren't, it's getting better, but people weren't seen as people. They were their disease. A person isn't somebody with schizophrenia, they're a schizophrenic. They're not somebody who has bipolar disorder, they're bipolar. And the mentally ill compared to someone with mental illness. There was a survey experiment done by OSU a few years ago where they sent out surveys to different people and changed a couple words in them. They were exactly the same aside from in places where one said mentally ill, the other said a person with mental illness. And the negative responses, like, would you feel safe living next to somebody with mental illness versus would you feel safe living next to the mentally ill? Those responses were just extremely more negative, more afraid, more stigmatized. And that kind of gave way to a person first terminology and why we should use person first. Mental illness is also used as an insult. They say, oh, he's psycho, or look at that schizo over there. That's ableist language that's insulting to a lot of people. And there's a self-stigma that I look at myself, feel that my disease defines me and that I'm a burden to people. It's something that's really hard to get past. Now, I have my own issue queue. They're more tags than actual issues, but you get the idea. I have major depression, anxiety disorder, PTSD, ADHD, and TBD. And I say that because there's such a high level of comorbidity or coexisting conditions that I'm bound to get another diagnosis. A lot of them can mimic others, and it's difficult to often tell one from the other. On the plus side, I'm one diagnosis away from mental illness bingo, so I've almost got that full line. So I'm going to define what I have for clarity. Major depression. Feelings of low self-worth or guilt and a reduced ability to enjoy life. What makes it major depression is that there are symptoms that are present every day for at least 2 weeks. Not just a depressive episode, but it happens for a long time. Anxiety disorder. Characterized by feelings of worry or fear that are strong enough to interfere with daily activities. Now, this has a lot to do with your amygdala, which is in this little green spot there, also referred to as the lizard brain. It controls the 4 basic needs of any living creature: fight or flight, feed or breed. If I'm either going to run away from it or punch it, or I'm going to eat it or make babies with it. That's what it does. Now, I'm no scientist, never claimed to be, but my amygdala is more like that. It's very overactive. I have an irrational fear of everyday things. My brain gives me the same reaction to walking into a supermarket that other people might have when being chased by a lion. PTSD. It's failure to recover after experiencing or witnessing a terrifying event. I had a really hard time understanding what this meant until I was seen by a psychologist, and he explained it to me in computer terms after he asked me to fix his printer. And they were, imagine your brain as a computer. Okay, I'm there. Think of your short-term memory as the RAM, your long-term memory is the hard disk, the storage. Now, what's happening, you've got the RAM, which is really quick, back and forth to the CPU. You're getting information right where you need it. The hard disk takes a little bit longer. In somebody with PTSD, an event gets stuck right in the RAM, in the short-term memory. And anything, sight, sound, smell, any kind of sensation can make the person relive that event. It just goes straight back to the CPU. And it's not just remembering it, it's reliving it, going through the exact same thing that you went through during that event. There are treatments to try and move that back to the hard disk, but it takes a while. I also have ADHD. Varying degrees of hyperactivity, impulsivity, or inattention that lead to difficulty in academic, emotional, and social functioning. All of the above. When I was a kid, this was looked at as just being odd, daydreaming, not being able to focus, lazy because I didn't do homework, because I was bored, or just needing to go outside and run off some energy. It wasn't a condition that anybody actually thought of treating. Now, relatively, I've only been getting treatment for a short time. And I mentioned that because I said it's about to get personal. Before then, a palate cleanser. All right. So my normal was not normal. For as long as I can remember, I felt this way, that I was different. Now, we can go into the nature versus nurture debate. A little bit of both. My childhood was rough. I witnessed physical and verbal abuse between the people who were supposed to provide a sense of security. I was emotionally abused, which can take a lot of forms. I went through a lot of them. From a very young age, I was left alone a lot, which made it very hard to make connections leading up to this day. I had very few friends, overweight, ugly, bad hygiene, little guidance. I was bullied a lot, didn't know how to handle emotions, so I cried or lashed out quite a lot. And I thought that it was my fault. I blamed myself. I was defective, I was unlikable, I scared people away. It's all on me. And I never had a sense of safety at home, so I never really felt comfortable there. Like I was always on eggshells at home. And I became afraid of everything. I never had the safe place. Afraid of everything, angry at everything, everything was out to get me. But above all, I had one enemy in particular. You want to meet it? My nemesis, the mirror. Every time I looked in the mirror, see this, hear this in my head just screaming back at me. Every day, I absolutely hated what I saw. I couldn't understand how anybody could like me or want to be around me. But it wasn't the mirror saying it, it was my reflection. It was me, it was my brain, it was myself just saying all these horrible, horrible things to me. And this was the norm for most of my life. A lot of times I would try to fake confidence, it didn't really work. I'd act like things didn't bother me, but that just made it worse because I'd internalize it and just hold on to it and let it fester and grow until it became a ball of rage, which meant sometimes I would get angry. By sometimes I mean most of the time. I was also paranoid about everything, afraid of everything. I had deep, deep valleys where I couldn't function for days on end, which led me to feeling useless, couldn't function, mess up everything I touched, couldn't focus on anything. I was constantly in fear of losing my job because I couldn't do anything, and they were eventually going to catch on that I wasn't doing anything. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was wrong with me. Like I said before, I was a paramedic. And in that line of work, we don't get sick, we help the sick. We're above having mental illness, except we're not, because I can name too many people I worked with who died of suicide because they were also too good to get mental illness, or too, I don't want to say too proud, but they didn't acknowledge that something was going on and they didn't seek treatment. And I was also too proud to think that it could happen to me. I wasn't confident in anything else, but this is the one thing, no. I treat people, I don't get treated. None of that. Fortunately, I never got to that point where other people did, where I was 2 steps from the ledge and just took the jump. But those were some very sobering moments. But something happened. And when I say something, I mean some things. It was a series of events. I wish I could say there was a single aha moment, but it wasn't. It was a lot of things happened in progression that led me to question a lot of things. While I was working as a paramedic, I decided I didn't want to be a paramedic anymore, so I went back to college. Well, went to college, not back, and got an associate's degree in computer information systems. But one day while I was going, I drove up, and before I even got there, I started feeling, heart fluttering a little bit. Something's going on. I don't want to be here. And I pulled in. It wasn't a test day. It wasn't a speech day. It wasn't a report due day. It wasn't anything other than class. and I just had a full-blown panic attack right in the parking lot. I was looking for any excuse that I could come up with to get out of the parking lot and go home and just not have to walk into those doors. Not the first one I had, but it's the first one that I started questioning. Then I had a career change, graduated, and then I got into development and started hanging out in online developer communities, which I know hanging out in online communities can sound like a cesspool, but in general, a lot of the online communities, especially in development, are more inclusive and more understanding than in my previous life. There's nobody throwing out racial slurs, sexual slurs, anything. It was just, hey, how can I help? What? Oh, you've got an issue, I'm gonna help you out. Hey, we don't talk that way in here. We're all good people. And I think that's amazing. Then I had a health scare. Did not go into too much detail. I found a lump where there shouldn't be a lump, got scared, everything's fine, don't worry. But I started reevaluating a lot of things, especially my health, both mental and physical. Then I accepted that I needed help. I saw other people living happy lives and not going through the same things that I was. People didn't get nearly as angry as I did. People weren't affected by everyday things like I was. And then I had an epiphany. Maybe everything else wasn't the issue. Maybe it was me. So it's one of those situations where if everywhere you go smells like dog shit, look at your own shoes. For a lot of people, this is the hardest part. All the signs were there, but I couldn't see them. I was constantly afraid, crippling fear of everyday things. Social situations were paralyzing. I canceled plans a lot, paranoid about absolutely everything. Everything was out to get me. I wasn't happy. I was angry. Anything could set me off. That lizard brain, it was in high gear. Fight or flight, feed or breed. If I can't eat it or make babies with it, I'm gonna run away or fight. That's my base instincts were taking over. I became really hateful. It was usually a misunderstanding. I did get angry, but I was never really hateful towards anybody. It was just the way that I came across. And I suffered. I realized that I had been suffering and there was something I could do about it. And it took the words of a wise old Jedi to help me get to that point. Master Yoda. So finally, I got treatment. I take medication every day. I am a huge believer in better living through chemistry. I see a therapist, I find outlets. I'm active in the Drupal community through teaching and helping. I'm active in the local Drupal community. I play in a band. I play Barry sax in a band. Not a fun rock band, but a concert band, which is still a lot of fun. And I start the conversation, but it was not easy because in case you're not familiar with the American healthcare system, it's not great. There was a frustrating period between when I started going to a therapist and they said, you have depression and PTSD. Great, what can you do for me? You need to be on these medications. Give them here. And I can't prescribe them. You have to get into a doctor. I didn't have a doctor. I had to wait 6 weeks before I could get in. So it was this strange gray area where I know I need medication. I know I should be taking this. I know this is what can help me. It's right there, but I can't get it. And it was really, really frustrating. Therapy helped, but getting my brain chemistry to even out would have been even better. During this time, I attended a talk by a man named Ed Finkler. Do any of you know him? Have you heard of him? He is a PHP developer out of Indiana. He lives in West Lafayette. He founded OSME, which I'm going to go into OSME a little bit, a couple slides from now. And it was a PHP meetup in Chicago, and it was very similar to this talk. It was mental health in the tech community. And he was telling his story. It changed my life. And the fact that the room was packed, all kinds of people around me, same questions, same people interested in this, gave me one bright, shining ray of hope, and that is that we're not alone. The fact that I wasn't the only one in that room listening to him with questions, excited about what he had to say, told me that we're not alone. And nobody is the only one going through this. To put it in a PHP kind of way, may have different variables and methods, but the interface is kind of the same. I realized I was afraid of the way that people might view me, and that was more terrifying than anything. I don't feel that way anymore because of medication and therapy, but also because of organizations like OSME. Now, after getting on medication, getting treatment, I'm not ashamed of who I am. Obviously, I'm up here telling 3 strangers and 2 people that I know my life story. It's part of me. I'm not too proud to admit I need help anymore. I don't have valleys that are as deep, not to say I don't have bad days or deep valleys, but they aren't quite as low. I'd say above sea level. And they're much more manageable. My anxiety has gone down a lot. Still shows up occasionally. I'll still have the occasional panic attack, but nothing to the extent that I used to have. I've become a lot more comfortable in social situations. I'm still pretty introverted, so after this, I'm probably going to need to hide for a little while. But I'm not really as unreasonably afraid of doing things as I used to be. Obviously, public speaking is one of the most terrifying things, or something that people are really afraid of doing in general. And hello. And now I work with OSME. So I've been talking about them quite a bit. It stands for Open Sourcing Mental Illness, focused on erasing the stigma around mental illness, specifically in the tech community and to help with resources for the workplace. It was founded by Ed Finkler, started in 2014, not as a nonprofit at the time, got nonprofit status in 2016, and we publish handbooks that are ADA compliant, Americans with Disabilities Act compliant, and just give resources so people know what they have available when they're going through problems. And everything's vetted. We have volunteer lawyers and psychologists who help put things together. It's just great. It's run by some amazing people, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it. Also, I can tolerate this thing a little bit more. And because the resolution is great, it says, even though we don't agree on everything, you have some valid opinions and shouldn't be afraid to share them occasionally, but not too much. Don't wear out your welcome jerk. Again, something I repeat. For those of us with mental illness, we're not alone. I mean it in general, I mean it human-wide, but more specifically in the tech community. But why tech? Well, in tech, it's been suspected for a long time. Creative people appeared to be more prone to depression and anxiety and mental illness in general. Before, there were only sites like, the previous site used to be devpress.com, and it was a forum that OSME kind of absorbed when the maintainers were no longer really maintaining. Excuse me. Now it's OSME forums, and there was word of mouth, just like anecdotal, hey, I'm feeling this. Oh, it seems like a lot of people are feeling that. Now, one reason it's theorized is that intelligent and creative people tend to think over situations more than others. Also tend to overthink, but think over. And what I mean by that is we tend to replay events over and over again. When we're writing code or designing something or trying to figure out a problem, it's not just, oh, point A, point B, something went wrong. It's point A, A.1, A.2, A.3, A.4, all the way, and just replaying that over and over. And it doesn't stop at code. It stops, or it keeps going into personal lives, everyday scenarios. Oh, something bad happened. I'm going to replay that. How did I get from not feeling like shit to feeling like shit or being in a bad place? And replaying that over and over can lead to feeling depressed, hopeless. It can just bring the same emotions that you experienced during those events back. Also in tech, we have this thing called imposter syndrome. Has anybody heard of that? For those of you who haven't, it's imposter syndrome, or imposter phenomenon is the more accurate term. But it's boiled down, high level, it's a feeling that you don't deserve to be doing what you're doing. That eventually the bottom's going to fall out, somebody's going to find out that you're a fraud, and you're going to lose everything you have. I have that. I don't know how the hell I have my position. I don't know how I keep getting accepted to talk. I don't know why people come to listen, but people still do. I still show up. When I first started development, I saw all these amazing people, so much more talented than me. even now, I see all these people so much more talented than me. And I feel like I can't compete, and that's the wrong way of looking at it. I'm not competing with anybody. It's a really hard thing is to look at it that way, that you're not competing, they're not after your job. Just because you're not at that level doesn't mean that you're not good at what you do. Something that I really have a hard time with is asking for help. And I have a hard time understanding that asking for help isn't weakness. Asking for help is probably one of the best things you could do to learn the most, because everybody in this room knows something that somebody in this room doesn't. And it's okay to show that you have limits. Lying about being able to do something is complete and total bullshit. Don't do it. Ask for help. It's common, and by it, I mean imposter syndrome. It's very common in every developer community that I take part in, online, in person, whatever. Everybody feels this kind of thing. And one of the biggest things is the inability to take compliments. If somebody says, hey, good job, I'm just, no. But now I'm able to say thank you, which is huge for me. All right, I've got more unexpected audience participation. Questions for you. May seem silly, but I'd like you to answer. Would you tell someone with glasses or contacts to try looking harder? Would you ask someone in a wheelchair why they decided not to walk? That's the correct answer. Would you tell someone with diabetes or a heart condition, stop taking their medicine and just snap out of it? Okay, those all seem pretty silly, but let's switch it up. Let's play some Mad Libs. Would you tell someone with depression to try being happy? It happens. You might not, but it does happen. Would you ask someone having a panic attack if they considered trying harder to not have anxiety? Would you tell someone with ADHD to stop taking their medicine, just try focusing? These happen a lot. They seem silly, but you see it a lot. We've all been on the internet. We all see memes. We see these images pop up in our social media feeds. This is an antidepressant. This is shit. Wrong. That literally keeps me from staying in bed all day most days. I don't need pills to be happy. I guess that's kind of true, but they really, really help. And one of my favorites, what if I told you you don't need antidepressants if you lift? They all say the same thing. It's a decision to feel the way that you feel. You don't need help. It's something you could just snap yourself out of. And I can vouch for the effects of medication. Everyone's different. What works for me may not work for the next person. There are a few side effects, but the benefits greatly outweigh those side effects. And we also have our own memes. I know it's kind of small, hard to read. It says, if you can't make your own neurotransmitters, store-bought is fine. So, how can we collectively erase this stigma? Well, best thing that we can do is be stronger than fear. And I don't mean beat your fear at arm wrestling. I mean starting the conversation. Don't be afraid to talk. Listen to people if they're willing to talk to you about it. Let people know they matter. Don't be ashamed. Remember, if you have a mental illness, you're not damaged, you have a disease. Try to be respectful. Not all disabilities are visible, not all cuts bleed. Try to think of what you're saying. Sad is not the same as depressed. Liking to be organized is not the same as having OCD. OCD is a terrible disease, and if you know anybody with it, you know just how terrible it is. And minifying it by saying, oh, I would rather have my pencils on this side of the desk is OCD is just doing a disservice to human. Now, anecdotes are one thing, but I have some facts to show that I'm not full of shit. OSME has done science, and we continue to do it. These are from 2017. I should update it with the 2018. I do have some answers from 2016 in there as well, but it's an annual survey that we do. We try to get as many people to take it as possible. From 2017, we had about 800 responses. It was made available to several different communities in the US. All these responses are self-reported. Now, would you bring up a physical health issue with a potential employer at an interview? The yes, 23%. no, 37%, maybe 40. So it's not really even, but the yes is about a quarter. If we switch that to mental health, yes is down to 5%, a giant 69% for no. Do you feel that being identified as a person with mental health issue would hurt your career? This is from the 2016 survey, and in that survey we had 1,700 responses, so a little bit larger sample size. Sorry, it's hard to read, but for maybe is 41%, it has 7%, I think it would, 39%, has not or don't think it would only make up 12%. So this entire chunk of the pie is in the positive, in a negative way, of only 12% of people say no, it hasn't, and no, I don't think it would. And this is something that I worry about every time I give this talk because they're often recorded, but it's kind of freeing knowing that if somebody goes and searches for me on the internet, they will be able to see it and all my cards are on the table, and if they still hire me afterwards, hey, good on them. Do you think discussing a physical health issue with your employer would have negative consequences? Well, you can see the giant red is no, 71%. So maybe 25, yes, a very, very slim 4. Let's switch it to mental. 23% said yes. So it's a much larger selection, 5 times more think that there would definitely be negative consequences. Now here's one I want to preface. It's self-reported. The national average of all adults is 20%, well, roughly, and 800 responses. Have you been diagnosed with a mental health condition? 43% of people said yes in the tech community. Now, taking that same 43%, do you think you have a mental health condition? And again, the 43% of yes is included in this. Possibly and don't know, add on another 28%. So only 29% of people in the tech community who responded to this think that they do not or don't believe that they have one. But the vast majority thinks that they do or may. Now, to me, that means that we're afraid to talk about mental illness, especially if we're the ones suffering from it. But it also means that we're not alone. We're afraid because of the stigma. We're afraid that being honest will have negative consequences. People might change their opinion of us if they know, hey, this person has mental illness. If you have anxiety, worrying about something like that can be extremely scary, in addition to walking into a supermarket and getting mauled by bears. Some of our minds go straight to the worst case scenario. For me, it's very black and white. I'm working on that, but if it's not good, it's horrible. If things aren't... One scenario for me was, have any of you ever had a hard time logging into your work email? I was filling out my resume the first time that happened because my brain immediately went to, oh, I can't get into email? I must be fired. Okay. That's the pendulum that I have. We're afraid that we might get sent to the HR department. Now, how many of you talk with your HR rep on a regular basis, which could be good or bad? Yeah, not too many. HR is there to protect the company. I know that they have a hard job. I know that the things they do are important, but it is difficult for somebody who comes out with a mental illness or discloses a disability to their immediate supervisor or somebody that they talk with every day to then say, I can't talk to you about this, go talk to HR, and now you're talking to someone who might as well be a complete stranger that you've met maybe once or twice during orientation. Now, like I said, in 2015, there were 43.4 million adults 18 or older with any mental illness. That comes out to about 17.9% of all US adults. So I'm going to put some numbers to this. Why should a workplace care? Well, money. Depression alone impacts an estimated 9.5% of the American adult population, which causes roughly 200 million lost work days each year. And that costs employers up to $44 billion with a B dollars annually. That's a lot of money. But what can we do? Well, slide. What we can do is work with our companies and our workplaces to try and create a culture of inclusiveness. If if an employee feels more comfortable being open or like they can come to the manager or somebody, then things might be better. I would do very little for days on end. I would get very angry because I couldn't do anything, I couldn't function. And I'd be afraid because I wasn't succeeding, because I wasn't doing anything, which led to probably 20 hours of actual work, and that's being very overestimating. It was probably closer to 10 in a week, and 30 hours of not doing anything other than, why can't I do anything? But if I would have felt comfortable with the company and saying, listen, I need a day off to recharge, please just, forgive me, it's a mental health day, or even just taking a day off, then recharge for 8 hours of PTO, and that's 32 hours of productive work that the company could have been benefiting from. That's the kind of inclusiveness I'm talking about, making it welcoming for everybody. Also, we're taking the 2019 survey at osmehelp.org/research. Please, if you can, take it. It's not a short survey, it's about 20 minutes, but every response helps us out tremendously. OSME also has the handbooks. We've got 3 of them. It's for mental health and tech, guidelines for mental wellness in the workplace, which is more of a creating a culture of inclusiveness, guidelines for executives and HR professionals, which is the higher level, and guidelines for employees, know your rights, know your protections. You can also take the 2019 survey. Every response helps. Now, we're fortunate because in open source tech, community is our greatest resource. We can know how to code, that's great, but the people here at these conferences are the most important things to open source, just being here. 43% of respondents claim mental illness diagnosis. That's a lot. Means we're not alone. And something that events like this help us recognize is that we're more than usernames. We're not just ones and zeros. We're not just somebody on Slack that you can or at channel if you really, really hate them. But we're people, we're humans. We're together, we're talking, we're sharing knowledge, we're having conversations. For those of us with mental illness, we're not damaged. And with a little work together, we can erase the stigma. Some resources available. osmehelp.org is the OSME website. It's on stickers out at the booth. Psychologytoday.com has a really good find a therapist tool if you need a therapist, and it can get very, very granular, like to the location, to what they specialize in, if you prefer somebody who's religious or non-religious, if you prefer a male or female, if you prefer whatever, and you can find a therapist that fits your needs. One thing to keep in mind, your first therapist is probably not going to be your therapist. It's like relationships. You need to find one who fits for you. If somebody just doesn't click, it's not abnormal to say, you know what, just not working out, and find somebody new. Suicide Lifeline, 1-800-273-8255. If you're having issues and need to contact somebody, that's available. If you or someone you know is contemplating with a plan, 911. And I didn't talk about it, I should have. mentalhealthfirstaid.org is mental health first aid training. It does exactly what it says on the tin. They teach how to not respond, not treat, but how to recognize signs and symptoms of a mental illness problem or crisis, and how to triage it and get the appropriate care for that person. If I remember correctly, the trainings are free or donation-based, and it's a regular certification just like CPR or first aid, where you get certified, you have to recert every couple years and get the training. It's really great. I suggest everybody take it. I suggest that, especially those in management, take it to recognize signs of burnout and stress in employees. Yeah, so I want to thank you for letting me talk with you. I really appreciate you coming in here, and open it up for questions. Doug Van.
Would you like to summarize Matt McKay's response?
Okay. Yeah, so that was really exciting. For those of you who don't know, at DrupalCorn, which is a conference in Iowa, DrupalCamp in Iowa, a fun little camp. It's coming back this year, I think in November, maybe a little bit later. But anyway, he attended my talk, and he took what I had to say, went back and created within Lullabot. And if you don't know, Matt Westgate is the CEO of Lullabot, CEO and founder. He went back and he did a survey very similar to what OSME does, but within Lullabot, to find out where the holes were, where the gaps were, where they could improve to make the workplace a little bit more inclusive, what they could do, where they felt that they were lacking in insurance, for instance, and treatment, available time, just resources in general. And so he took that and he built off of it, and now the employees of Lullabot have some say into what they can, or what kind of resources are available to them. There's a committee within Lullabot that meets, I don't know how frequently, but they talk about what's going on, how can we improve, how have we improved, what are our next steps. And granted, you can't wave a magic wand, make money appear, and make everything better immediately, but to see a company like Lullabot taking those steps, which they're huge in the Drupal community, to see that is just amazing, and I hope that more companies and organizations follow suit.
How would you recommend other organizations do that?
I think the first step would be the handbooks, taking a look at that. And for reference, the handbooks are on LeanPub, and they are $10 for all three, and they're DRM free. So I think if you go to osmehelp.org/resources, it has a link to that. It's one of those kind of pay what you can. But those three handbooks are a great starting off point. Reading Matt's blog post really can outline a lot of it. OSME provides any resources. I mean, that's not our main focus to go in, but we try to answer any questions or anything that we can to make ourselves available. And I don't know of any consulting firms that specialize in this. Maybe there should be some. that might be a silo, an untapped silo. But yeah, I think that just making the effort to start with would be, or the first step would be just checking out the handbooks. Anyone else? Thank you. If you were to choose one to share, my talk from Design for Drupal is probably the best one that I've given in quite a while. And they're all available on Drupal.tv, which is a really, really great service that I forget which organization put it together. It was a group of students, and it's just become amazing. Yeah?
I bring this up not to brag, but to share. I was very honored to be able to donate to your campaign.
Thank you.
I don't know if you were planning on saying anything, and I wouldn't judge if you didn't, but I personally want to make sure that's part of it.
I have a slide for it. I don't really, I feel horrible about saying, hey, give me money, but for those of you who don't know, a lot of this, OSME helps out a bit, especially since we have a booth here. They were able to help with my travel and lodging for this. My workplace is very generous as far as giving me time off or approving my PTO, but they can't just keep shelling out money for me to travel, especially when it doesn't directly benefit them, which I completely appreciate. I'm not trying to talk down about anything that they're doing. But I did start a GoFundMe campaign to kind of help offset the cost of traveling to where I don't get reimbursement. And I did have this slide. I wasn't going to go to it, but Doug pushed me to it. So I have, thank you. I have a,
Thanks for speaking publicly.
oh, thank you for coming. I really appreciate you coming to this. I mean, it wouldn't be worth anything for me to talk if nobody was here to listen, and hopefully the conversation gets started. So yeah, I have a Patreon or a GoFundMe, which I think that I learned that GoFundMe is case sensitive. So if anybody does go to it, if that one doesn't work, then try an all lowercase. Not expecting anybody to go to, but just in the event. So yeah, that was all I have, and we are just over time. So I will be out at the booth most of the day, probably most of tomorrow. I don't know that I'll be here at 8 o'clock, but I'll definitely be here tomorrow. Yeah, come up, talk to me, ask any questions. I'm more than happy to answer. All right, thank you.